Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
There is an old English proverb, cometh the hour, cometh the man. Iqbal Singh Chahal, Commissioner of Mumbai Municipal Corporation, has proved that with good management skills and even with the limited medical resources that are available, the COVID crisis can be turned around. I have no doubts that there are many Iqbal Singh Chahals in the cities and towns of India who are making a difference. But media reports are also highlighting that COVID management in rural areas and Mufsil towns is below par. Every leader of the armed forces is a trained manager. He has no choice but to be one. To accomplish his mission in battle, that is to win at all costs, it requires organization, coordination, and management. Minute to minute management. In aid to civil authority, the commanding officers of the Indian Army, who command 500 to 800 trained, motivated, and disciplined soldiers and have vast transport resources under command, are ideal crisis managers. There is a catastrophe unfolding in our rural areas. As per reports, 516 districts of the total 734 districts of India are returning a positive rate of 10% and more, and that too with limited testing. In my column, I address this issue and promote this line that armed forces are the ideal resource to manage the COVID crisis unfolding in our rural areas. How are the armed forces being employed so far? Are they being optimally utilized? Armed forces have put in a phenomenal effort. It is being coordinated by the Defense Minister, advised by the Director General of Medical Services of the Armed Forces, and through the Defense Secretary, who is receiving the feedback from the various empowered committees and the ministries, the armed forces resources are being deployed. The Defense Minister has held a number of meetings to coordinate the entire effort. This was explained in detail by the Chief of Defense Staff in an interview to the India Today. So far, the effort of the army, rather the armed forces, has been in transportation of oxygen containers from abroad and from within the country. Yeoman effort has been put in by the Indian Air Force and the Indian Navy. And you all are well aware of that. In addition, the Defense Research and Development Organization has created large size hospitals of 500 to 1,000 beds. These are being managed by the resources from the armed forces. These are located in some of the major cities. In addition, the states have requisitioned the armed forces to set up field hospitals in various towns and cities of the state. The entire focus of effort of the armed forces is in the urban areas, and that too by staffing the large hospitals created by the DRDO. There is no doubt that the armed forces have supplemented the effort in the urban areas to fight the COVID battle. However, disproportionate resources of the armed forces have got sucked in to this effort. Resources have been pulled out from field formations. There are reports that even the battlefield nursing assistants of the field units are being deployed. There's also a report that even the resources of the Remount Veterinary Corps, who are also capable of fundamental first aid, have also been committed. 400 retired officers are being re-employed to sustain this effort. Normally, the resources of the armed forces must be superimposed on the civil resources. And in the meantime, the civil government invokes its emergency powers to create the necessary medical personnel infrastructure to manage these hospitals so that the armed forces can be committed elsewhere. However, this is not appearing to be so. The current commitment of the armed forces, medical personnel, and other resources seems to be semi permanent in nature. In the meantime, as I mentioned earlier, a catastrophe is unfolding in the rural areas. Our statistics are suspect, and most of us believe that there is gross underreporting of the COVID cases and the deaths. There are harrowing tales in the media from Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, with large number of suspected COVID victims, bodies floating in the holy Ganga or buried in shallow banks of the river. The Allahabad High Court observed that the infrastructure in Uttar Pradesh is Ram Bharose. The situation in the rural areas and small towns of other states is no different. In my own state or in my own district of Fatehgarh Sahib, there are 8 civil hospitals and not one ventilator is functional. The village dispensaries are dysfunctional. The sarpanches have no idea about COVID management. Patients are rushed to the already choked nearby large cities. In the meantime, the central government has issued a very elaborate advisory that requires COVID centers to be established in each village and also following the 3-tier system that we have of medical care in our rural areas. I am of the view that with the existing state of the medical infrastructure, this advisory or the standard operating procedure which has been sent down by the center is unimplementable. I recommend that underutilized managerial resources of the armed forces must be pressed into service. The effort which has been put in the large cities must be diverted to the rural areas. The government must invoke emergency powers under the various acts like the Disaster Management Act, Epidemic Act, and so on to acquire, rather, to carry out, to deploy the private doctors and the other infrastructure to fight the COVID battle. The military, which has been committed to manage these large sized hospital urban areas, must be relieved forthwith. so that they can utilize this resource to set up 100 odd field hospitals in the rural areas which they are capable of. Each district or small town must have a war room which must be manned by a commanding officer or in a larger district by the brigade commander. He must coordinate the entire battle against COVID. The field hospitals of the armed forces, with the relieved manpower from the cities, must now be committed to in the critical areas to take care of rural patients. The managerial skills of the armed forces must be utilized to supplement the oxygen and coordinate its distribution, transportation of patients, allocation of hospital beds, and as I mentioned earlier, to supplement the effort with the field hospitals. Our citizens deserve a decent cremation or burial, as the case may be. Indian Army has done this before in times of earthquakes and way back in 1919, 1920 Spanish flu epidemic. Indian Army can assist in giving our citizens a decent cremation and burial. Time is running out. Before the crisis reaches a magnitude where it cannot be managed, the government and the armed forces must review their strategy to fight the COVID battle. Let the civil administration manage the large hospitals and relieve the military's manpower and commit its main strength, that is managing resources, which it does in battle, and I have no doubts that it shall do it in our rural areas and small towns. This is a battle that must be won, and armed forces are the resource that can help us to win this in our rural areas. Enjoy reading the column.